pleased to have Rebecca Rimel with us. She is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Pew Charitable Trust. Rebecca has a very interesting background. She started out in the nursing school at the University of Virginia, where my niece is, and then went on to get a master's in business, and then went to go to work for the Pew Charitable Trust as a health program manager, and rose very quickly to become the executive director and then to her current position in 1994. Those of you who have been following the Pew Foundation know that they are very important foundation that's been involved in funding a lot of projects and in making foundations, the transformation of foundations from funding, making the transition into making projects that actually affect the world, I guess is I'm trying to put it. That they actually, foundations became interested in not simply having reports that sat on their doors, but actually trying to get involved in activism, if you like, in agency in transforming the world. And so her topic, off the bench and into the game, democracy isn't a spectator sport, is an apt topic for the president of the Pew Foundation, because there's perhaps no foundation that's gotten off the bench more than the Pew Foundation. And so we're very pleased to have Rebecca talk about the perceptions of how this experiment works. Thank you.
Well, I guess it's a good time to be talking about getting off the bench and in the game, because I understand there's a big game coming up, and go Bears, right? I really am delighted to be here. Bruce, I want to thank you for the kind invitation, and Mark Levin for facilitating the event. But I especially want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy day to be here. I had lunch today with some of the faculty from this great institution, and I trust you know how blessed you are to be part of the Berkeley family. We debated, we discussed, we exchanged ideas. It was passionate, well-informed, and there are not many places in America today where there's such fertile ground for that kind of discussion. So just as I'm going to say about not taking things for granted, in general, and being an American, I trust that you don't take it for granted being part of one of this country's great institutions. To those who much is given, much is expected. And I think each of us understand that we've been blessed with tremendous resources and great opportunities. And as a result of that, much is expected. We're called upon to give back to our community and indeed to our country. Many think, particularly after the recent election, that America is at a crossroads. But there can be no debate that our individual and collective involvement will be key in determining this great country's future. An important tradition in this country's history took place, and I don't mean the World Series. I'm referring to our nation's recent presidential election, a privilege of participation that each of us as Americans share. But we really too often forget about our blessings and the blessings that we enjoy in this country. And I think we often fail in our obligations to nurture the institutions and democratic principles that assure us those blessings. There are three critical factors that will play a pivotal role in our nation's future, I believe. America's image and stature in the world is in question. It's certainly the first time in my lifetime, and the first time, I think, in recent history. That said, the greatest threat we confront, I believe, is our own apathy and that of our youth. Apathy, anger, or opting out won't solve our problems. Whether you agree or disagree with the direction of your country, your state, or your community, you have to get off the bench and back into the game. At the Pew Charitable Trust, we have one overriding objective: to advance the debate on issues that matter, and matter a lot, to the health and happiness of the American people. Our primary role is to provide fact-based information that can be used to inform the public debate and to drive public policy. Once the facts are clear and irrefutable, we educate, we enable, and yes, we advocate for change. We facilitate the public debate on pressing issues affecting the health of our nation. There are many, and hopefully in our discussion we can cover some of these, but to mention just a few. Global warming and what it's going to mean to us and citizens around the world. The 600,000 children who are trapped in foster care. Ensuring the availability and quality of pre-K education for every 3- and 4-year-old in America. And death penalty reform. Should everybody who is on death row have access to adequate counsel and DNA testing? We believe so. And the protection of our wilderness and oceans, among many other environmental issues. But let me return to the first concern. America is losing its luster, both domestically and globally. This was the chief finding of a major global public opinion poll commissioned by the Pew Research Center recently. Over the last 2 years, they've been conducting a series of surveys, and the last one was with 44 nations and 38,000 individuals. They are back in the field with another poll, and unfortunately, the trends that they identified almost 2 years ago are getting worse and at an alarming rate. The results show a disconnect between how Americans perceive themselves and their government and how the rest of the world perceives us. The war aside for a minute, America's image has taken a beating in recent years. Among our long-time NATO allies, in developing countries, in Eastern Europe, and most dramatically in Muslim societies. Since 2000, the favorability ratings for the U.S. have fallen in 19 out of 27 countries where data was available. While people around the world embrace things American, including our economic and democratic ideals, they condemn the U.S. influence on their way of life. The most frightening finding of all is our image in most of the Muslim world. Negative views of the U.S. among Muslims are wide and deep, from the Middle East to Indonesia to Nigeria. The post-Cold War reality is this: old friends who need us less like us less, especially Western Europe, and we're failing to win new friends around the world. Perhaps most disheartening finding is that we, as Americans, are completely clueless. Our own opinion of ourselves is inflated and strikingly at odds with the rest of the world. 80% of us believe it's a good thing that our ideas and customs are spreading around the world, but we appear insensitive to the cultures and priorities of our global neighbors. The bar is set high for the U.S., as it should be. Just let's face it, we're the big kid in the canoe. In fact, some argue we're the only kid in the canoe these days. We exercise dominant influence on global affairs, and we need to step up to the obligations that come with that influence. It's time to accept the full weight of responsibility that comes with our privileged position. I know working together that we can and we will respond. We are blessed as a nation, and we must remember that much is expected of us. We need to do more to reduce carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases that contribute to global warming. We have to move now to save the world's oceans from destruction. If not, the impact will be profound. We must work to improve the quality of life for all the world's citizens if we are to have peace and prosperity. The rest of the world believes we are failing to live up to our leadership and our stewardship responsibilities as the most powerful and affluent nation on earth. And that should trouble and sadden all of us. What is more tragic is Americans today, unlike our forefathers, have been taking for granted the democratic ideals that others admire around the world and are willing to die for. There's been a growing disengagement of Americans, particularly young people, in the last several decades. Let's take the 2000 election, for example. Only a third of eligible Americans under the age of 25 voted. Imagine that only 45% of those under 25 even bothered to register to vote. And 50% of young people said that voting was not important. Pew Charitable Trust wanted to halt this trend by investing in projects to increase the motivation, opportunity, and ability for young people to vote. We launched the New Voters Project 2.5 years ago. It was the largest grassroots youth voter mobilization campaign in history. It was a nonpartisan effort, and it did register 350,000 young voters in 6 battleground states. They contacted over 750,000 young voters in the final weeks before the election. And they got candidates, most importantly, to pay attention to young people as an important voting bloc and to stop the cycle of neglect and disengagement. These and efforts of other groups have been unprecedented this year, and the results were very, very promising. Our grantees conducted the first solid analysis of youth turnout based on national and state exit polls. They found that the youth turnout this year did rise sharply. 21 million voters under the age of 30 went to the polls. That's a turnout rate of 52% and an increase of 4.6 million over the 2000 election. And for 42% of these young people, it was the first time that they had ever voted. I think that's something that we can all be proud of. And for those young people in the room today that did vote, I commend you. But was this year's election enough to re-energize and re-engage our citizenry? I think we have a lot of room for improvement. 45% of Americans didn't bother to show up in arguably a critically important election for the future of themselves, their families, and the country. One of the Trust's founders, J. Howard Pugh, gave a speech in 1953. This was during the hot period of the Cold War, and I think his words resonate today. We are constantly being alerted to the dangers of subversive activity at work in our land, but a far greater danger lurks in what has been called subversive inactivity. No subversive forces can ever conquer a nation that has not first been conquered by subversive inactivity on the part of the citizenry who have failed in their civic duty and in service to their country. As freedom is our most precious national asset, I am convinced that apathy, indifference, is our greatest national sin. We've inherited a great democracy, and shame on us if we take it for granted. Historically, young Americans have energized civic life, and certainly there's no greater example than this campus. The major social and political movements, women's rights, civil rights, human rights, were fueled by the idealism, the voices, and the actions of the young. Agree or disagree with their agenda, you can't debate the force and the impact of their passion. Well, today, more than ever, we need their enthusiasm, their insights, their intellect, and their commitment if we're going to address the issues that will define our future. It's said all the time that young people are our future. The survival of our democracy rests with the generation coming of age in it. Young people who participate learn to build instead of berate, learn to commit instead of complain, defend what they believe in rather than attack what they don't understand. Many today, perhaps some of you in this room, see an electoral system that is badly broken, where one person does not equal one vote, or where special interests with deep pockets hold all the cards. Is it any wonder that young people are so disgusted and feel so disenfranchised? We've told them over and over that their voice isn't heard and that their vote doesn't count. Is it any surprise that the American public believes that big money can elect a candidate, remove someone from office, influence those in office, and drive public policy in this country? Since the late 1980s, the rules governing campaign financing have become totally ineffective. The cost of running for office and the amount of time spent raising money is staggering. Dialing for dollars starts before people even take office, the office to which they've been elected. The work we've supported documents a shift in power away from the individual and into the hands of organized special interest. Knowing this, why wouldn't Americans silence their voice and shelve their vote? After years of effort with little progress, campaign finance reform took a huge leap forward with the passage of the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act in 2002. I think this provides a good case study of the way we approach our work. I noted earlier that we see ourselves as an honest broker of information in the public interest, but that we often take our role further, and once the facts are clear and irrefutable, we also educate and enable, and then we advocate for change. Campaign finance reform is an issue where the Trust has advocated in the public interest. Over the past 7 years, we funded efforts to shine a bright light on the flow of money into and throughout campaigns, whether tracking television advertising dollars, soft money, or state campaign contributions. Our grantee partners educated and advocated on the bills as they moved through the floor of both the Senate and House and upon passage to the committee. Throughout the debates, the reform argument drew heavily on the facts, figures, and research compiled by at least 10 of our partners. The Trust supported the legal team that defended the law, and last year the Supreme Court upheld all of the major provisions, a stunning victory for every American. Without transparency and trust in our electoral system, we'll never bring the public, young or old, back to the voting booths. All of us here can bring our influence, our intellect, and our investments to bear on the critical issues by providing accurate, timely information, leveraging our resources, and bringing the best ideas and influence to move the needle on problems that matter to our health and shared civic life. In fact, arguably, that is the most important role for a great university like this. The Trust investments are not an act of charity. Our work invests for leverage, and we want to return results. We want to win on behalf of the American public. There's a sense out there, at least on the part of some, and maybe it's well-deserved, that foundations are like some ATM machine in the sky. You push the right button and they cough out the cash. Well, I hate to tell you, but that's basically wrong. We approach our work more like a strategic investor, looking to derive the maximum benefit from our time, our talent, and our capital. Like any business, we seek a return on our investment, except in our case, is measured not in dollars, but rather in positive, powerful change for the public. I mentioned 3 factors in my opening, and I'll close with what I believe is the most important. With our country facing turmoil both at home and abroad, it is time for Americans to get off the bench and back in the game. As Martin Luther King Jr. once observed, the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. With the scars of September 11th still fresh in our hearts and the weight of world opinion pressing down upon us, it's too easy to let cynicism and helplessness rule. While the challenges are enormous, recognizing our limits is no excuse to embrace them. Rather, it's a mandate to answer the call. As Americans, we'll fight for our rights, and we should do no less in honoring our responsibilities. If you attended a policy debate or a political rally, I applaud you. Next time, bring a friend with you. Ask their views. You may be surprised, and I guarantee you'll be better informed for it. Coach a Little League team. Volunteer in a classroom. Email your senator. Learn about the issues that affect you, your community, and most importantly, act on them. If democracy is to thrive, we need the people sitting here in this room, all of us, folks from every walk of life with the clout and confidence to speak truth to power, to call all citizens to live up to their civic and global responsibilities. There is no doubt that California leads the nation. You're playing a key role in defining America's future on issues ranging from education to the environment, on topics as important as tolerance and diversity. As you go, so goes the nation. You individually and collectively matter, and you matter a lot. So we must remember we all need to get informed, get involved, and get invested. Thank you very much, and I'd love now to open it to a conversation. Thank you. And I understand that this will be a no-holds-barred, feisty, interesting debate, just like we had over lunch. And I guarantee you there was no topic we didn't cover, and most of them we solved, I think.
There's nothing left there.
Right. That's right.
I'll start it off. You mentioned campaign finance reform, and certainly the Pew Charitable Trust is prominently known for its involvement in the McCain-Feingold legislation. Tell us what you hope to get out of campaign finance reform and what you think we've achieved with campaign finance reform as a result of passing.
Overall, I give us a C. An A would be that the problem is fixed. And I think all of us agree that it's only a beginning. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. my words, not his. What kind of grade would you give yourself for accomplishments so far in campaign finance reform? McCain-Feingold, how far have we come? How far do we have to go? Is that?
And also, what were your goals, and did you meet your goals?
What were our goals, and did we meet them? When we started into this 9 years ago, we brought together the advocates, and the advocates felt that anything short of full public financing of elections was unworthy. I mentioned earlier, we like to win. And we made the decision at that time that that was not a politically viable strategy to pursue. It just was not going to happen. It wasn't going to happen in the courts. It wasn't going to happen in the sort of arena of public opinion and public policy. So we decided settling for a third of a loaf was better than no loaf at all. And that's not to minimize what we've accomplished. But what we wanted was more transparency and accountability in the system. So now, at least, you know where the money is coming from and you know where it's flowing to. We wanted to close the soft money loophole, and we wanted transparency. And third, we wanted ads, people to be able to stand up and take responsibility for the ads that they were running. So every time during the election I heard, I'm George W. Bush and I supported this ad, I went, yes. You didn't have to debate who had paid for the ad and who was responsible for its content. If you take yourself back to 2000, it was unclear. In fact, sometimes ads were being run for candidates about which they had no knowledge, with content that they had not approved. So those were our three goals. Those were accomplished. The rules were upheld. What we could not have known is the creativity with which people would try to beat the system. And some people have asked me, you know, the 527s and the flow of money, aren't you right back in it? Well, it's not over. The enforcement of the Federal Elections Commission has, I would argue, been weak. Maybe that's the kind word. And we really have to look at enforcement. A law is only as good as enforcement and regulation allows. And so if you have a law, regardless of how good it is, and the enforcement of it is weak, that's in any area of public policy, you haven't come close to sort of solving the issue or winning the fight. So are we out of it? No. Are we pleased with how far we've come? Yes, with many partners, some represented in this room. But there's a long, long way to go on behalf of the American public. Yes?
I would like to know what would be your goal for the next 4 years or the next whatever years in terms of the 527s, for example. I mean, would you support people or the internet raising of funds? It strikes me that this has been a rather people-oriented way of getting into the game of politics through the internet raising funds, Howard Dean's campaign, and things like that. And I wondered whether this is a good thing or a bad thing in your goals for campaign finance reform.
Can everybody hear that? I'll repeat the question. How do I feel? How does my institution feel about the way the internet was used in terms of raising funds, particularly funds from many, many smaller donors, more involvement, more money flowing into campaigns, but maybe from more diverse sources? That is a good thing. That is a good thing. That's Americans basically voting, if you will, with their pocketbooks and getting engaged and getting involved. And there's transparency. There is the ability for all of us to know where the money's coming from and where it's going. That is healthy. That is good. We have never, ever taken a position that there ought to be less money flowing into the system. Even if we believed it, it would be foolhardy to take, I think, that position, because money will flow into campaigns, and the more, if you will, important campaigns seem to people in terms of issues that matter to them, the more people that are going to want to participate. We worry where the enforcement of the laws that are on the books is not rigorous. We worry when the Federal Elections Commission is taking what appears to some as a passive role. We worry when people are trying to game the system through finding loopholes, basically, and that special interest on either side of the aisle are trying, in essence, to cloud transparency and to have huge dollars in special interests coming in ways that the campaign finance reform bill intended not to have happen. But broader participation, more people, money flowing from many different individuals, it's a good thing. It's about participatory democracy. Yes.
I served for a number of years as chairman of the Citizens Research Foundation, looking at some of these questions. And recently, for instance, in the election in Montana, Senator Max Baucus, who in the end didn't even have an opponent, spent $6 million versus, say, a few thousand by Mike Mansfield. And this $6 million came predominantly from California and New York. It had very little to do with Montana or the people of Montana. And the transparency is very difficult because there's no way of associating those names, and people who have larger PAC interests have now decentralized with a lot of innocuous names like the Good Government Fund of this or the Good Government Fund of that. So that the transparency is really not there. What do you think we need to do about that?
Well, we need to disentangle, if you will, and once people can understand exactly where the money's coming from and who it is, you're absolutely right. But we have to understand Americans are wildly entrepreneurial and very creative. And I am actually not sure that we will ever be able to regulate or legislate all of the creative ways that people will try and change the system. What we need is better regulation, better oversight, and people sort of calling it when someone truly is abusing the system. But let's be clear, money will flow into major state campaigns from outside of states because what happens in the Senate and the House matters in terms of federal policy. So, you know, a senator elected from state X will not only have an impact on that state, but will have an impact on all of our lives. People understand that, and particularly with our government so equally divided. So there is a lot at stake. I think what we're going to find, if we could improve the transparency, we're not there yet, and if we could improve regulation and enforcement, we'd be making a great step forward. I mean, if you remember, 6 years ago, we basically sort of written this off as an intractable problem. But I want to be clear, I give us a C. You know, that would be a probably optimistic grade right now. I am not out here saying, you know, we got it, we got the answer.
One wonders if that $6 million is a contribution or a purchase.
Well, let's be clear. The reason a lot of Americans aren't showing up is what I mentioned in my formal remarks. They believe that people respond to special interests and, you know, there is a quid pro quo. And, you know, I think any one of us sitting in this room that didn't think that was the case might be living on a different planet. So, you know, it is true, but what's heartening is the, if you will, democratization of the process. The fact now with the internet and grassroots organizing and such, a lot of people are saying, you know what, I might not be the multi-gazillion-dollar contributor, and maybe I don't have personal access, but I do have a way to get back in the game. And it is going to define my future, and I'm going to use the tools that are at my disposal. But you're right, it is not ideal. I'm not sure we'll live to see ideal. What we have to do is make incremental progress. Zach.
To the extent that apathy among young and older relates to the two-party system, of feeling that there's not enough diversity between the two parties, and it's twiddle-dee or twiddle-dum, you know, which is part of what you'd hear from the youth. From your knowledge of what's going on around the country, where do you see interesting or exciting trends or developments toward multi-party or proportional representation or other alternatives to the two-party system and how it functions now?
Question is, you know, the two-party system, and, you know, are they so similar that people don't really feel it's worthy, if you will, of getting into the fray? And what's going on? Well, you know, in this election, there were real choices. I mean, it may only been two candidates, major candidates running for office, but there was a difference in choice. And I think eventually we really got to the issues. I mean, there were, I thought the debates this election were terrific in that we understood differences in positions. And the American public did tune in, not as many as we would like. We've done a lot of polling since the election to try and dissect this value voter. What is it? You know, how do we understand it? And as in most things, it's quite a complicated question. It means very different things to different people. For roughly 25% of the people who said that's what the moral values is what motivated them, it really was about issues like abortion and gay marriage. For another group, virtually the same size, it was about wanting somebody that they thought honesty, integrity, moral values to them meant, about the characteristics of a person. And then for a smaller percent, but fairly significant, it did come out of their religious convictions. It came about for them, that they wanted their religious convictions to inform and drive their decision. So, a lot now of time is being spent on red and blue. I think we have to remember that the country is, while it's divided, it's evenly divided. I know I live on one coast, you're here on the other. It's like, oh my gosh, all that red, depending on where you stand politically, or geez, great, all that red. But when you actually look at it, it was a 3% difference in the popular vote of Americans. That means that it was a very close race, and it means that we are fairly significantly divided on issues. We talked earlier, sorry, a little bit off your point, but if we're going to move things forward in this country, and pick your topic, global warming, health care for the uninsured, any policy issue is going to have bipartisan support. It is not going to be a winner-take-all. The Democrats can't win, and the Republicans can't win, because we are divided, if you will, from a partisan and political perspective. So we've got to find issues where we can reach across the aisle, join hands, and actually bring the art of compromise back to public policy. In terms of where there are emerging sort of additional parties and some interesting things happening, I'm not aware. My guess is we're going to see a lot more of that sort of discussion over the next year, year and a half. I'm going to go way back, and then we'll work up to front.
Well, thank you. My name is Bob Zimmerman, and I'd like to thank you for all the great work that Pew is doing. I've just returned from 4 months of solid campaigning in Ohio and Florida. And although campaign finance is extraordinarily important, there are other areas that are important. There was hardly a day that went by during those 4 months of campaigning that we weren't surrounded by police and told we couldn't campaign on the public streets of the United States of America. Causing interferences to no one, approaching no one, just with a campaign table set up, distributing pro-Kerry literature, bumper stickers and pins. We were often forcibly ejected. I think matters like this are important. The press doesn't cover it. Nobody talks about it. And it forces campaigning away from grassroots activity and onto the television screen where almost all of it is conducted. And it's sound bites. Well, for what it's worth.
Well, the comment being that, actually limiting the ability of what I would say is the most important free speech, which is, we all are sort of the products of where we come from. In Philly, it was very different. The streets were clogged. The literature was flowing. We in the office buildings kind of almost got tired of the beep for your candidate. I mean, the noise after days. And people really took to the streets. And so, I think that experience that you talk about is very unfortunate indeed.
Even in Philly, during the Kerry rally, we were told to move because we didn't have a license from the Department of Licensing. The police wouldn't tell us to move. The Department of Licensing told us to move. And when the Department of License, when we said no, the police would would uphold the Department of Licensing. Can you imagine going to seek a license to conduct a political campaign on the streets? Well, this was Philadelphia.
Well, the good news is by the time that they figured it out, the whole election would be over. So, there are some, but I take your point that we ought to be able to lift our voices on any issue, not just campaign issues. And certainly, again, being back at Berkeley, you're reminded of that the important role that this institution played. I know it was a very difficult time, but, it was the voice of the nation, in the 60s. And so I take your point. Let's see, we're going to come up here. So why don't we go 1, 2, 3, and then over here and work our way back. Is that fair? Okay.
Okay. Let's see, when you first opened, you said there's a schism between public opinion outside the U.S. and the U.S. in terms of the U.S. Now, there is a guerrilla war going on in Iraq, and the whole history of that is very important in destroying the viewpoint of other people in the world toward the U.S. But in the things that you mentioned being important in this campaign, the Iraq War, and in the much larger sense, favorable social and political relations between Americans and the rest of the world wasn't significant. Now, is there really just the Americans are just totally out of it, in such as only a small percentage of people, like here in Berkeley, who take it as an important issue, or are there proxies that are serving for in these polls?
Well, a lot of people thought it was important, and people that voted both ways. And that comes out in the post-election survey that Andy Cohat has conducted. So I think it's important not to confuse whether people thought the issue was important with how they voted. You know, there are people that thought it was just as important that voted for a Republican candidate as thought it was important that voted for a Democratic candidate. They just saw the issues differently. And I think one of the things that I've actually been traveling a fair amount in the last 2 weeks that I've come to understand is, yes, we're deeply divided, but we aren't doing a very good job of sort of dialoguing across the divide. And if we continue down this path of the good guys and the bad guys, depending on which side of the aisle you sit on, I mean, we're just going to get gridlocked, whether it's on domestic policy issues or moving forward. You know, I don't mean to sound so Pollyannish, but I think people saw the Iraq War, international issues, as front and center in a way that was not true in 2000 for obvious reasons. I mean, international affairs and policy was missing completely in the 2000 election. Granted, we weren't at war and we hadn't experienced 9/11, but I don't think that it was, I'm sorry.
Well, actually, two candidates are on the side of being pro-fighting the war more and not making a change in the general policy, which is undermining the American viewpoint, which would essentially lend large numbers of people not to vote, which I think is the case. So it's more than compensated by younger people coming in. But it's clear that it was not this intense division along, you know, pro-anti-war faction was not reflected in between the two parties.
Well, the candidates took a different position on it in the end, but I take your right. We were here next, I think, and then over here.
You used the word finding several times, 3 times actually in the beginning of your talk. Finding can be something that's beyond debate, or a finding can be something that provokes debate. What does the trust invest in more heavily?
That provokes debate. There are no absolute truths, I think, when it comes to sort of public policy. It is, we do a lot of polling work. We do a lot of polling, particularly on the issue of religion, and how it's playing out in politics and public policy. And we generate findings. Those findings, though, are how the American public is thinking about issues, and that is meant to provoke debate and try to inform policy as it moves forward. It's not an absolute truth.
Could I ask a follow-up to that? I mean, you talked about wanting to identify problems and affect outcomes on that. In doing so, do you feel it's necessary, or do you in fact fund research that might indicate that the outcome that you seek is not such a good idea?
Yes. And if you're going to be intellectually honest, you have to know when to stand down and walk away. And let me just be clear, we've set ourselves up organizationally, not to get sort of inside baseball, but all of our polling operation is independent of us. It is a subsidiary. We don't have any say over what they poll on, the results. Sometimes my colleagues who are working over here on the policy side and the advocacy side are saying, they did what? They're polling on what? The findings were what? It doesn't reinforce my argument. And the answer is, well, that's not what they're in business to do. And their credibility and their reputation has to be impeccable. And I think that those of you that might know of our polling know that it is perceived that way, and it is because we are completely hands-off. They don't do contract research. They are not for hire. It is their job is to give voice to the American public. we're going to go over here. Just
Just to follow up on that, you mentioned a finding by a panel of experts that said elections should be totally government-sponsored, and you walked away from that finding.
No, this was the advocacy community saying that they thought that this was the right way to go. Now, we're investors. Our job is to take the resources we have and invest them and win. And we didn't believe, even though the advocates, many of them felt that way, we looked at the tea leaves, we looked at the lay of the land and thought, are we going to advise our board, our investors, to expend millions of dollars in pushing this agenda because we did not think it was winnable. May be wrong, we may look sort of like we walked away, we're not have the strength of conviction if you feel that that is the right answer, but we didn't think it was winnable. We walk away from other policy issues when we feel they're not ripe, we can't get leverage, there is no bipartisan support. It has to have bipartisan support because we can't win without it. Now we're going to go to you.
Thank you. My question is, you speak a lot about the youth vote, and as we all know, it's very important. My question is, how do you think that the changing role of fair time doctrines and media ownership in the 21st century is influencing how the youth perceives the democratic process and why they decide not to get off the bench? Do you think that's really playing a part?
Yeah, I do. I'm actually more in, oh, I'm sorry, yes. Has to do with, won't be as articulate as you, media ownership, how people get information, whether this actually creates kind of what I like to call a learned helplessness. I can't really do anything. I don't trust the findings or the information that I'm getting, and so I'm just going to check out. Does that fairly represent your point? It's a big issue. I'm a little encouraged because information is being democratized. I mean, you look out there for better or worse at the blogs, you look out there at the internet now, you look, we don't have, and this is not always a good thing, the kind of gatekeepers that we used to have. We also find that the public is deciding to turn to media where they believe that they take a ideological position similar to theirs. So people are now dividing themselves about whether they turn to CNN for their news or whether they turn to Fox for their news. Now, you know, one could argue that maybe that's doing more to divide us than to look for the ties that bind us. Media ownership is a huge issue, and the profits driving less coverage of international issues. Most major media outlets have closed their international bureaus. Many of you probably talk to journalists or know journalists. It's not a happy profession right now because the profit motives really are, many people feel, impinging on the quality of the information that we're getting. Not sure I've got a solution to that. I was yesterday at the San Francisco Chronicle talking to the editor, happens to be a Philly boy, and this is deeply on his mind. Yet, you know, and on every editor of every paper in America. It's an important point. We were going to go over here.
Well, I have a comment in search of a question. I don't have a question yet, but well, I know we had improvement in increasing vote registration and turnout. We also know we still have a great disproportionate participation among majority sections of the American electorate, the young, the elderly, the poor, low income, non-white, and to some degree, particularly women in some of those categories. And the comment in search of the question is that there are two forces within social reformism, both of which lack capacity to reach those populations. One which assumes basically these groups are not going to vote, and for the sake of progressive politics, we cannot really address them right now. And the other is an approach that really doesn't have roots within these communities. It doesn't really build a civic infrastructure. And I'm wondering, can you visualize a way that philanthropy could help turn attention not to the participation behavior itself, but to the infrastructures that, particularly in isolated, neglected constituencies, that would support that participation?
Perhaps you all heard, and it was very eloquent, but it is how do we get people who are not participating, particularly disadvantaged groups, minorities, the elderly, the young, to get off the bench, to think about civic participation, not just in voting, but on a range of issues that affect their community and their constituency. One of the great findings that came out of the research work that we did related to youth voting, because we wanted to invest our money well, and so we wanted to use the findings to drive how we were going to invest in this election. There are a lot of things that have been tried, celebrity stars, sort of candidates, parents sort of wagging their finger, telling young people they should vote. Basically doesn't work. What does work is peer-to-peer contact. If one young person reaches out to another young person, and this is not in a partisan way, but it says, look, there's a lot at stake here for you, and you need, I'm going to vote, and this is why I'm going to vote, and you need to too. The chances of them registering and the chances of them showing up go up exponentially. I believe that would be exactly true with other groups. And basically, if you think people are ignoring you and you don't think you've got a dog in the fight, and you're busy and there are demands in your life because of the circumstances you find yourself in, this is not going to rise to being a priority. So I believe we can do a lot more in these communities by education, as we say in Philly with an attitude, education that basically is talking to people about the issues that matter. A lot of people are asking us right now, what are you going to do now with your youth civic engagement work? Are you going to put it on the shelf and wait 4 years and get back into the game? No. What we're going to do is do polling work and focus group work to say, what are the 3 issues that matter most to young people? We know what one of them is, and that is the rising tuition cost and how it's crippling them and it's crippling their families. And it's crippling their families into retirement. And so pick a couple of issues where we think we can get some traction and see if we can't get them to get informed and educated and become advocates on that topic and look for policy solutions. So we have to pick issues that matter to the constituents, and we have to do peer-to-peer contact. And we know it works, and I have to believe it works for the young. It would work with the elderly, it would work with people from disadvantaged communities. But that kind of organizing, if you will, has not been done, so I take your point. We're going to work our way back over here. Yes?
First, I want to apologize. I got here late. I'm parked a mile away. But I downloaded a lot of your speeches this morning, and so I read about half of them. I went to the independent sector conference.
Did you fall asleep? I mean, that was pretty boring. But you're here. You're sure you weren't late because you slept through it? No, okay.
Press my question down so that I could cover every speech for the last 3 years.
Okay.
I went to the independent sector conference in San Francisco last year, and I shared with about 300 of the people there, a lot of the directors of the independent sector, my interest in a national service program for 25 years. Now, I work in a hospital laboratory, and my experience of talking to the experts is everybody says, no, you're not, this isn't a good idea. And back in 1979, Congressman McCluskey proposed a national service program where both males and females would register at 17, be encouraged to consider volunteering for service to the country, either community service or military, and they could do it between 18 and 23. And the conversation died and went nowhere. My interest was an energy conservation corps as an alternative to a future war with Persian Gulf. The last 2 years, I've come to meetings like this and shared it with experts and gotten a few letters, but 99% of the people don't respond. And that's at the independent sector, not a single person responded. One of the interesting things about civic engagement of youth that Congressman McCluskey found out from his senior and junior high school students, he did a survey of them, was that 90% of the students hated this idea, but 90% of them said if it became law, they would participate. And so, it's that human reluctance to want to volunteer or step forward into a hard task, but once the task is presented, there is a commitment to it. And part of the material I shared at the conference was a letter from Alberto Gonzalez acknowledging the fact that the Bush administration will consider this concept and review it, and some letters from the Clinton administration. But still, there's no movement forward. So I was just wondering if that's a subject that you could help generate a controversy. I think it's like shocking the spectators.
All right. Well, you used 2 words together, and they're really quite different. You talked about volunteering and mandatory public service.
No. Mandatory registration, just like males register now,
right.
But it's an enhanced one. where they would be registered at 17 and then indicate any interest in participating.
But it would be required.
No. They would say no. No.
Okay. Well, because the debate that where I thought you were going with this, and there are two schools of thought,
It would
is
actually, I'm sorry, it would actually have to be a new law passed by Congress to reinstate the draft. This would just enhance registration.
Okay, well, where I thought you were going with this, and there has been a lot of debate, I mean, young people are wonderfully generous. They will volunteer, they will give back. I mean, this is the most sort of philanthropic generation in decades. By philanthropic giving of their time, they care. So, you know, but what they haven't done is made that translation from volunteering to getting involved in politics and public policy for a lot of reasons. I think because they've listened to our generation so long telling them that, you know, they're all no good bums and that go into, you know, politics and your voice doesn't matter. But where I thought you were going is there have been a lot of people that have said mandatory public service is good for the country and good for the individual. A lot of other people have said, we just in America don't like the M word. We're not big on mandating anything. We like a choice. We like people to be able to volunteer. So, but the notion that you would register but not have to do anything about it, I'm a little confused about where that gets you.
The idea was to challenge youth at 17 to consider their role as future voting age citizens. And with the internet now, with the USA Freedom Corps website, there are indexed 30,000 different nonprofits that you can quickly find the one in your neighborhood that has the topic area that you have a passion to address, global warming, senior citizens, youth problems, and go through their website and fill out their application.
Well, this administration, that is the Bush administration, has been very, very supportive of volunteerism, and you know there is a commission on volunteerism and the like. So I don't think you would find much resistance from that to that idea from anyone. But why don't we go on back, and then we can come back if we haven't sort of fully answered that. Yes.
I was wondering, is there what would be your opinion? What would be your opinion as to whether there's anything that philanthropic organizations like the Pew Charitable Trust can do to enhance like the transparency and trust and legitimacy of the voting process when so there are machines involved in the voting process where it's impossible to tell whether these machines have been hacked and whether fraud has been committed, and because of the lack of a paper trail, for example, and just how they were built. And even when there is a paper trail, that paper trail will never be consulted unless the margin between the two candidates is really, really small, and that margin, if there's fraud, can itself be said to be too wide to be considered, for example.
It's a great question, and it basically, how do we assure that if people do vote, show up and vote, that the vote is accurately recorded and counted, and how do we reinstill people's faith in the system, the system of voting? Right after the last election, we started something called electionline.org, and I really highly recommend their website to you. But the project was to do just that. It was to go state by state and look at the changes that were being made, both for good in most cases and in a few cases not, in terms of how states were dealing with just this issue, how people were going to be able to vote, whether we were going to allow early voting, which you know in some states people have two thoughts about that. Florida did this, others trying in essence to make sure that the systems didn't collapse, if you will, under the pressure. I think if we hadn't seen some of those innovative ideas and we'd had turnout such as we did, we would have had many major problems. It turns out we had some problems this time around, but nothing of the scale that people anticipated. So Doug Chapin, who runs this, is monitoring state by state what's being done, how well it's being implemented, and giving, in essence, grades. And I would recommend it to you. We're not there, but improvements have been made. The Help America Vote legislation that was passed by Congress was a good thing, but it came a little too late. A lot of the changes that should have been made for this election were not. But highly recommend it. Doug is an expert on this. It's better, but it's not fixed. You're going to back here and then here.
Thanks. I wanted to get back for a second to the whole idea of the divided electorate and sort of the polarization of the voting public, and sort of also sort of point out, and I think you sort of alluded to this, that there's sort of this parallel process, not surprisingly, going on among federal elected officials, where sort of folks who are more moderate or who can sort of speak on both sides of the aisle are sort of this dying breed of politicians. And so I wondered, you talked about choosing the right issues, the issues where you can get bipartisan support, and clearly a lot of the ones, or all of the ones that Pew is investing in are those. I think early care and education is clearly one of them. But I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to the sort of techniques or the methods that can be used to somehow compensate for this dying breed and for, I think a deficit currently in the political process to sort of facilitate that and make that happen.
I got a great idea. I always leave everywhere with many great ideas, but I got one over lunch. And maybe what we should do is give an award, a lot of recognition, to politicians who work together bipartisanly on behalf of the American public and got something done. Maybe we should reward nonprofits who were willing to reach beyond sort of their normal constituents, bring others in for common cause to move public policy. I mean, we talk about our elected officials, but you look at our nonprofits and our advocates. I mean, they're as dug in, if not more so. We all talk to people like us. We all talk to people that think like us, go to the same movies. That's where America is, and it only perpetuates the problem. So we just took our board to Washington. We met with many elected officials and whatever. One of the greatest meetings we had, I'm sure he wouldn't be embarrassed that I said this, is with Governor Warner of Virginia. He came out of the private sector, hadn't spent his life in politics. Virginia is one of the only states, I believe, in the nation that has a one-term governor. So, he's not running for re-election. And he said the one thing that he was going to do is to raise a lot of money after he got out of office for any candidate that wanted to run on a centrist platform. He didn't care if they were an R or a D, but he was going to raise money because he thought that that was the future of the country, both at the state level and also at the federal level. So where you're going is exactly where I believe, and many other people believe, the country needs to go. But we have to be clear, it's not just our politicians that are kind of dug into their positions. We're kind of dug into our positions, and we see compromise as a dirty word. We're in the winner-take-all business as Americans right now, and I don't think that's a sustainable future. So I agree, and I like that idea. We'll take others. Thank you.